del señor Mencho.
¡Pura gente del señor Mencho!
¡Pura gente del señor Mencho!
¡Pura gente del señor Mencho!
¡Puro grupo elite!
¡Pura gente
del señor Mencho!
¡Grupo elite! ¡Pura gente del señor Mencho!
¡Pura gente del señor Mencho! ¡Pura grupo elite! ¡Pura el señor de los gallos!
¡Arriba, señor Mencho! ¡Arriba, señor Mencho! ¡Arriba, señor Mencho! ¡Arriba, señor Mencho!
¡Pura grupo elite! ¡Pura grupo elite!
¡Pura gente del señor Mencho!
¡Grupo elite! ¡Señor Mencho! ¡Grupo elite!
¡Pura gente del señor Mencho!
¡Grupo elite!
How El Mencho replaced El Chapo, the $15M most wanted manhunt. The fall of a king always creates a vacuum, and when El Chapo was finally captured and sentenced to life in prison, many believed the era of cartel dominance had ended. But in the shadows of western Mexico, another figure was already rising, quieter, colder, and far more strategic. His name was El Mencho. Unlike the flamboyant style of El Chapo, El Mencho operated differently. No flashy interviews, no public boasts, just ruthless efficiency. While the world celebrated the fall of one cartel empire, another was silently expanding under the banner of the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, known as CJNG. Born into poverty in rural Mexico, El Mencho's early life was far from glamorous. Some reports suggest he once crossed into the United States illegally and even served time in prison before being deported. But prison didn't break him. It refined him. It exposed him to networks, power structures, and the mechanics of organized crime. When he returned to Mexico, he didn't aim to join the biggest cartel. He aimed to build one. And over time, CJNG evolved from a regional group into one of the most violent and sophisticated criminal organizations in the world. Unlike older cartels that relied heavily on secrecy, CJNG made statements through spectacle. Convoys of armored vehicles, heavily armed men in military gear, public displays of power. It was psychological warfare, and it worked. Soon, whispers began circulating in intelligence circles. El Chapo may be gone, but something more dangerous had taken his place. Backhand index pointing right. If you're enjoying this deep dive so far, make sure you subscribe to the channel. More cinematic crime stories are coming your way. Don't miss the next chapter. The US government was watching closely. Shipments of methamphetamine and fentanyl were flooding American cities. Violence in Mexico was escalating, and one name kept appearing in reports: El Mencho. Unlike his predecessor, he didn't just control territory, he controlled supply chains, production labs, smuggling routes, international partnerships. It was corporate-level organization, hidden inside chaos. By 2015, CJNG had grown powerful enough to openly challenge the Mexican government. In one shocking incident, cartel gunmen shot down a military helicopter. That moment signaled something new. This was no longer just organized crime. This was open war. And while the public barely knew his face, intelligence agencies began calling him one of the most powerful drug traffickers in the world. This was no longer about replacing El Chapo. This was about surpassing him. By the time global authorities realized how powerful El Mencho had become, the damage was already spreading far beyond Mexico's borders. Cities across the United States were seeing a surge in synthetic drugs, especially fentanyl and methamphetamine. Behind many of those supply chains was the expanding empire of El Mencho. The U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration began identifying the Jalisco New Generation Cartel as one of the fastest-growing criminal organizations in the world. Unlike older cartels that depended on Colombian cocaine routes, CJ&G focused on synthetic drugs, cheaper to produce, easier to transport, and far more profitable. This shift changed everything. Synthetic drugs didn't rely on crops or weather. They relied on chemicals, labs, and logistics. And El Mencho mastered that system. Authorities believed he oversaw a network of clandestine laboratories capable of producing massive quantities at record speed. As overdose deaths climbed in the United States, pressure mounted on Washington to act. Intelligence reports painted a clear picture. CJ&G wasn't just another cartel. It was becoming a global enterprise. Then came the announcement that shocked the world. The U.S. government officially placed a $15 million bounty on El Mencho's capture, one of the highest rewards ever offered for a drug trafficker. His name was added to the most wanted lists. Sanctions followed. Financial networks were targeted. Allies were arrested. The message was clear. He wasn't just a Mexican problem anymore. He was an international target. Backhand index pointing right. If you want the full breakdown of how cartels operate behind the scenes, make sure you subscribe now. Every episode uncovers a new layer of the story. Don't miss what's coming next. But hunting El Mencho wasn't simple. Unlike El Chapo, who had been known for dramatic escapes and visible movement, El Mencho operated almost invisibly. He avoided public appearances, rarely used phones, communicated through trusted inner circles. He understood something critical. The more famous you become, the easier you are to find. Reports suggested he constantly moved between rural strongholds, protected by heavily armed security teams. Some even claimed he had early warning systems inside government agencies, though proving such claims was nearly impossible. Meanwhile, CJ&G continued expanding. In some regions, they didn't just traffic drugs, they controlled local economies, politics, and entire communities. Fear became their most effective weapon. And every failed attempt to locate him only increased his legend. To some, he was a ghost. To others, he was the most dangerous man in Mexico. By the late 2010s, the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, CJ&G, was no longer just another criminal organization. Under the command of El Mencho, it had transformed into something far more structured, almost corporate in its precision, military in its discipline, and ruthless in its execution. Unlike older cartels that were built around family ties and regional alliances, CJ&G operated like a decentralized machine. Cells worked independently but reported upward through layers of trusted commanders. If one unit fell, another replaced it instantly. The organization never paused. But what truly set CJ&G apart was its militarization. Videos began surfacing online, masked men in tactical gear, standing beside armored vehicles, holding military-grade weapons. They weren't hiding in the shadows. They were sending a message. We are organized. We are armed. And we are not afraid. Authorities were stunned at the level of firepower, high-caliber rifles, improvised armored trucks, often called monsters, advanced communication systems. It wasn't just intimidation, it was strategy. Behind it all, El Mencho remained unseen. He rarely appeared in photos, rarely gave interviews. In a world where ego had brought down many crime bosses, he chose invisibility as his shield. Backhand index pointing right. If you're finding this breakdown intense and insightful, subscribe right now. Stories like this go deep, and you don't want to miss the next chapter. CJNG's influence spread beyond drug trafficking. In some regions, they imposed their own rules, controlling businesses, influencing local officials, and deciding who could operate within their territory. Communities lived under silent pressure. Cooperation meant survival. Resistance meant consequences. Meanwhile, intelligence agencies across North America tracked financial movements, shell companies, money laundering operations, cryptocurrency transfers. The organization wasn't just violent, it was adaptive. The more pressure authorities applied, the more sophisticated the cartel became. In contrast to El Chapo, whose power had relied heavily on historical smuggling routes, El Mencho built an empire rooted in modern logistics and chemistry. Synthetic drug production required fewer farmers and more chemists, fewer borders and more networks. That shift made CJNG faster, harder to disrupt, and more scalable than its rivals. Power in the cartel world is never permanent. It is borrowed, held together by fear, loyalty, and money. And once the United States placed a $15 million bounty on El Mencho, that balance began to shift. Because money changes people. A $15 million reward isn't just a headline, it's temptation. For rivals, for insiders, even for those closest to you. As international pressure intensified, authorities began targeting not just El Mencho but his inner circle. Family members were sanctioned. Alleged associates were arrested. Financial accounts were frozen. Properties were seized. This wasn't just a manhunt anymore. It was psychological warfare. Reports suggested that members of CJNG's leadership were being captured one by one. Each arrest created cracks in the organization's armor, and in criminal empires, cracks spread quickly. History had already shown what internal betrayal could do. The downfall of El Chapo had involved intelligence leaks, informants, and shifting alliances. Cartel loyalty often lasts only as long as power feels secure. And now, El Mencho had a price on his head large enough to test anyone's loyalty. Backhand index pointing right. If you're locked into this story, subscribe now. Every part gets deeper, and you won't want to miss how this saga continues. As the bounty remained active, rumors spread constantly. Some claimed he was ill. Others claimed he had relocated permanently to remote mountain regions. Sightings were reported, then denied. Every whisper added to the myth. But being a ghost comes at a cost. Isolation grows, trust shrinks, communication becomes limited to a handful of people, every meeting becomes a risk, every phone call becomes a liability. For a man running a global criminal enterprise, invisibility can protect you, but it can also disconnect you from the very machine you built. Meanwhile, rival cartels sensed opportunity, power vacuums attract predators, territory disputes intensified, violence escalated in contested regions. CJNG had grown strong, but strength invites challenge. The war wasn't just between governments and cartels anymore. It was cartel against cartel. By this point, the search for El Mencho had grown far beyond Mexico's borders. What began as a national security concern had evolved into a multinational operation involving intelligence agencies, financial investigators, and narcotics task forces across continents. The $15 million bounty remained active, a constant reminder that he was no longer just a cartel boss. He was a priority target. Unlike traditional manhunts of the past, this pursuit relied less on boots on the ground and more on data, satellite surveillance, financial tracking, signal intelligence. informants embedded in supply chains. Every shipment intercepted offered clues. Every arrest opened new interrogation leads. Authorities understood something critical. They didn't need to chase him directly. They needed to dismantle the system around him. CJNG's financial networks were mapped carefully. Shell companies linked to exports, real estate purchases through intermediaries, cryptocurrency wallets suspected of laundering profits. Step by step, investigators aim to isolate the flow of money. And in organized crime, money is oxygen. Backhand index pointing right. If you're following this intense breakdown, make sure you subscribe right now. The final chapters reveal how power begins to shift and what happens when the empire starts to feel the pressure. Meanwhile, security operations inside Mexico intensified. Elite military units carried out targeted raids in regions believed to be CJNG strongholds. Labs were destroyed, weapons caches seized, high-ranking operatives captured. But still, no confirmed capture of El Mencho. The challenge was clear. Unlike El Chapo, whose movements had at times been tracked through communication slips and personal routines, El Mencho operated with extreme discipline. Minimal digital footprint, limited travel, compartmentalized communication. The fewer mistakes you make, the harder you are to find. Yet history shows that prolonged pressure changes even the most careful leaders. Isolation increases stress. Networks weaken under strain. Rival factions test boundaries. The longer the hunt continues, the more unpredictable outcomes become. And for the first time, analysts began asking a new question. Not if he would be found, but when. Because in the world of organized crime, every empire faces a turning point, and the clock never stops ticking. After years of relentless pursuit, the story of El Mencho is far from over. While he remains elusive, the pressure on the CJNG empire has reshaped the cartel landscape in profound ways. Arrests of high-ranking lieutenants and disruption of financial networks have slowed operations. Rival factions sense weakness, and territories that were once uncontested have become battlegrounds. For a criminal organization, this is the point where survival depends not just on firepower, but on strategy, adaptability, and loyalty. Despite the disruptions, CJNG continues to operate. Its decentralized structure allows it to function even when leaders are isolated or under threat. The difference now is that the world is watching more closely than ever before, and intelligence agencies have learned from past mistakes with El Chapo. Analysts predict that the cartel may evolve even further. Some believe it will fracture into smaller, less centralized groups, each fighting for territory. Others argue that El Mencho's leadership has been so strategic that the organization will survive intact, adapting to modern law enforcement tactics. For El Mencho himself, the reality is clear. Being the most wanted man in the world comes at a cost. Constant vigilance, limited mobility, and the constant threat of betrayal define life at the top. And while some insiders remain loyal, others weigh the $15 million bounty against their allegiance. Backhand index pointing right. If you followed the journey of El Mencho and want more gripping real-life crime stories, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell. Every week, we break down the world's most fascinating criminal empires. The story of El Mencho reminds us that power is never guaranteed. Even the most sophisticated organizations face pressure, scrutiny, and the eventual challenge of maintaining control. And in a world where millions of dollars are placed on a single head, every decision, every alliance, every move can be the difference between survival and collapse. As the CJNG adapts to the pressures of international law enforcement, one thing is certain: the hunt continues. The man who replaced El Chapo may remain elusive for now, but the consequences of his empire's actions ripple far beyond Mexico's borders, into the streets, cities, and lives of countless people around the world. This is the world of modern cartels, ruthless, complex, and ever-evolving. And as long as crime exists, so too will the pursuit of those who rise to its top.